much too complex, much too complex, too complex, too complex, too complex.
Good afternoon. My name is James K. Holder II. Many of you may know me as Sir James II, and I'd like to welcome you back to Not on My Watch. As always, I'd like to ask you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. I want you to retweet this and repeat this message. If you're watching, today it's Wednesday, March 29th, 2017, and without further ado, we're going to jump right into today's special recalibration on racism. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about what racism is, and much of what I wanted to do with this cast is to just discuss sort of the nomenclature around discriminatory policies in the United States. As we're facing and approaching this level of heightened onslaught of racial discrimination, sexism, homophobia, transphobia from the White House itself, it's important to be able to define the terms. And so let's just go over some ground rules and just kind of discuss what my position is on this stuff. As I continue to discuss these issues, I want you to know where my position, what my point of view is. So let's start with a basic definition of racism. If you Google the term racism, what will probably come up if you use a Google search, well, Google is a whatever. Racism, prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. While that can be true, I don't know that this definition tells the whole story. And so I want to kind of break this down into nuggets so that we can process it separately. And I want to take the three terms that they mentioned here and just kind of further define those. Prejudice. Prejudice is sort of just a preconceived notion that's not based on any fact, not based on any historical data. So it can be associated with race, it could also be associated with sexism, it could also be associated with any other difference. If you're applying a rule set or mindset about someone or something, it's making a prejudgment based on your particular interaction with that person or that situation. So that's what prejudice is. Let's skip to antagonism. And antagonism is a very broad category, right? It's anything that's sort of a neg. It's a negative approach to any situation, and it could be very small, it could also be very big. But within the antagonism realm are microaggressions. So microaggression is one of those terms that is very important to know and discuss. And basically, a microaggression is something that, based on a prejudice you might have against someone of a different race or even the same race, you might treat them a particular way. So it's kind of a microaggression is something that doesn't necessarily oppress someone, but it does stem from and root from some ignorant position that is prejudicial. Discrimination. Discrimination is simply prejudice plus power. Anytime you have someone making a decision or a choice from a position of power on someone who is not necessarily different from them, but of someone who they have a prejudice against, then that becomes discriminatory. So, for instance, if I believe that if I'm reluctant to hire a woman in a particular position because I fear that she's of childbearing age and she may become pregnant and her pregnancy may become an encumbrance upon the profitability of my business, that becomes discriminatory practice. If I'm refusing to hire a woman, or if I'm predisposed to not giving a woman a particular opportunity, even though she's most qualified for it, because of the possibility that she may become pregnant, and I view that pregnancy as sort of a loss for me, that would be discrimination. Because I have the power to decide who I'm going to hire for this position, and two, I hold this prejudicial mindset that women are somehow less profitable because they bear children. So let's just set that there. I want to go on to just further extrapolate on this, because a lot of times when we discuss racism in terms of someone else's race, you're making an assumption that someone can only operate in their own in the interest of their race, and many times people don't necessarily do that. So America's racist power structure is white power. Let's just put that out there. That is the history. That is the legacy. That is the story that we are built with. It consumes our media. It is the bedrock of all storytelling. It is what we come to know. And if you look back at the history books in America, if you look back at television, if you look back at advertisements from the 1800s, the media has been complicit in the proliferation of white male dominance narratives and also white supremacist narratives. And so I want to discuss those two things under the umbrella of white power is white male dominance and also white supremacy. If we were to draw a Venn diagram, there would probably be an equal commensalism between these two terms. And the reason why is because white power, white supremacy, while it is if we're going back to this term antagonism, right? White supremacy has a connotation of being on the farthest extreme of antagonism. It is brutalism. It is hate crimes. It is, the Ku Klux Klan is the mascot for white supremacy. But they aren't the only actors within this. And that's important to understand. I think when you assume that if something isn't associated with the Klan, that it somehow isn't white supremacy, and that's not actually true. White male dominance is a little bit different, and it's important to acknowledge this as a key pillar of white power because it ultimately links the power of majority. Being in the dominant race of white, being in the dominant gender of male, being in the dominant orientation of heterosexual, being in the dominant orientation of being cisgendered as opposed to transgendered, being in the dominant position of being able-bodied as opposed to disabled. These are all these intersections that really do play into the same white power, white supremacist, white male dominance narratives. And if you see, there is a continual echoing of the onslaught of all of these groups, whether it's disparaging women, disparaging the disabled, disparaging homosexuals, disparaging immigrants. All of these things play into the same overall umbrella of white power. And this is a tradition that has been carried out through American history. Let's go back to even, I'm going to continually pull examples that aren't necessarily black and white, even though ultimately it boils down to black and white. Black as this coffee that I'm about to drink. And what I want you to understand is that, take Native Americans. We know that they're Native Americans. They were the inherent bodies to the land that we now know as America. And yet, many still refer to them as Indians. Why is that? There had to be a narrative placed in order for America to become this unifying body and this melting pot that somehow was devoid of its original inheritors, Native Americans. There had to be a labeling of them as other. There had to be this sort of separation where you had white Americans that are real Americans, and you hear this term all over, this dog whistle in the media now, versus Indians. Now, you could tell me all day long that Christopher Columbus called them Indians, or whoever landed here, where Amerigo Vespucci called them Indians, whoever, because they thought they were in India. But no one's that stupid. And when you get to the New World, you know you're not in India. So why would you continually perpetrate this narrative that these people are Indians? The labeling of Native Americans as Indian, and this is just my own viewpoint, is that it created an otherness. it made them foreign. It made them something else, and it took away their birthright to this land, and therefore made it acceptable to pursue an onslaught of antagonism against them based on prejudices, based on the color of their skin. Narratives like this have perpetuated throughout history, and the same ones that allowed for manifest destiny, the same ones that justified the Trail of Tears, the same ones that justified slavery, the same ones that justified segregation, and the Ku Klux Klan, and the same ones that justify literacy tests that asked black voters how many bubbles were on a bar of soap, in order to be able to come and vote or exercise their legal franchise as according to the Constitution. These are all things that have stemmed from these same types of narratives. And so any narrative, and I don't know that there's a guidebook to this, this is just sort of one of those things you kind of become sensitive to and you pick up on it. And with blacks specifically, these narratives are ones that label us or try to paint us unilaterally as inferior, inhuman, stupid, barbaric, animalistic, easily angered, lazy, guilty, aggressive, ugly, and with women specifically, the ugliness turns into this sort of application of masculinity. It becomes about, oh well, you apply a level. You amplify all of these other tropes and add in that black women are somehow more masculine, and therefore they can take more of an assault. They can take more antagonism, and that they are more deadly. They're more aggressive. They're dangerous, and therefore this perception of the angry black woman becomes this character, along with the buck, the black buck, and you have these characters that have been created throughout time, and we see them playing out. We see these characters come back frequently within the media, within daily occurrences in the United States. Conversely, when it comes to white people, you have the ideas that these same narratives perpetuate white people as pure, that's a very designated one, innocent, deserving, beautiful, and preferential. That anything, if it's white, it's got to be right. And that's kind of what the basis of these statements and these narratives are. Now, why is this important? White power exists to create a ruling class with privileges. Okay? And what that allows you to have is representation in the media, and because you have such a ubiquitous representation in the media of these mindsets that perpetuate white people as preferential, you automatically get validity as a white person. So take wealth out of it. Take personal gain out of it. You still have a validation. You receive a benefit of the doubt as a privilege of being white in this country, in a country that is sort of ruled under a white male dominance and a white power structure. This is, again, something that the media is complicit with, and that's the importance of this show, because I operate outside of that. I try as my best to intentionally operate outside of that spectrum. Let us discuss now, and I'm kind of breezing through this stuff. At any point in time, if you want to send a question to me about the show, like we'll get to that, and there will be time for you to do that. As you can see, there's my Twitter at the bottom of the page. You can always tweet me. I want to talk about intersections of privilege and indifference. So the reason why it's important to separate white male dominance and white male dominance narratives from white power and white supremacy is because what white male dominance allows all of us to do is align with either of that intersection. There's an intersection of white and male that is a double majority that sort of that tends to overlap with the majority of being cisgendered, heterosexual, of wealth, having had opportunity to or access to education. And so these are the types of things that are just ultimately privileged people. Many times, people who don't fall into the duality of being white and male will ascribe to white male dominance narratives in order to reap the benefits and privileges of those particular segments of our population. So you can have, within that sense, let's look at this past election. We know that about 95% of black women voted for Hillary Clinton, whereas about 87% of black men voted for Hillary Clinton and about 9% of black men voted for Donald Trump. This is something that was allowed to happen because black men, in many ways, are able to sort of take off that blackness and ascribe to a male, cisgendered, of wealth, having had access to education, able-bodied narrative and coalition, even if they don't necessarily fall under the umbrella of white power, because we have enough in common. You also have white women who are sort of the many people are mad at white women right now because most of them voted for Donald Trump. And when we say most, we're talking about 53% or 56% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And again, there's a duality within what allowed them to make that decision. In my view, you have whiteness, which even though I'm not male, I can ascribe to a white dominance narrative, even if it's not male. If I am straight as a white woman and I'm married to a white man, I can reap all the benefits and get all the access of having white male dominance within the comfort and protection of my relationship with this white man. So, I don't have to put myself out there and really risk anything. If I align enough with this, I can also benefit, because if this white man is benefiting, then as his wife, I'm benefiting too. And so that is something that, allows white women this privilege of intersectionality, because you now can kind of separate yourself out of this. Now, I want to talk about black women and white power. And because of this intersectional privilege that black women don't have, this brings us to our Women Crush Wednesday. Kudos to Madam Secretary Hillary Clinton, because she, in sort of her first speech, she's been sort of resurfacing from the woods and giving her perspective on different things. And it's fantastic to see her talk, because you really see the character of this woman now more than you were able to see before. Now that there's no material gain for her, you see her doing things like standing up for Democratic Congresswoman of California, Maxine Waters, Auntie Maxine, hey Auntie Maxine, and then also respected journalist April Ryan. And I want to talk about these two people. Hillary Clinton, I want to give a thank you for defending black women in the way that you did. And I want to thank you for speaking truth to white power as you've done for many years. Let's talk about Maxine Waters. Yesterday, my heart was on fire. I was angry because Bill O'Reilly made this comment that ultimately aimed to silence and discredit Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters, the face of the resistance, based on a sexist and also racist statement that basically painted her, I don't want to get into it, but he basically talked about her physical appearance, talked about her hairstyle in a way that was incredibly racist, incredibly insensitive, incredibly sexist. And what we have to understand is that this is a white man who operates on Fox Media. This is the quintessence of white power. This is Fox News is the quintessence of white male dominance narratives. That's what they specialize in, and that's their brand. And it's kind of disgusting, right? But I don't expect anything other from them. Let's skip to something, and my chest is burning right now because I'm getting mad all over again, and I'm trying to focus. So let me sip some water. And now I want to talk about April Ryan. And I'm angry because this is not the first situation with April Ryan. Now, yesterday, Sean Spicer cut April Ryan off, told her not to shake his head at him as he's sitting there lying. That's all this man does. And she's trying to do her job. She's trying to get us truth as a journalist. And as one of the probably only black female journalists in that room, she has to sit and be subjected to this condemnation from this white man who operates under this white power umbrella structure that tells her, don't shake your head at me. But I want to talk about, we talked about Sean Spicer and April Ryan, but let's talk about Omarosa Manigault and April Ryan, because prior, 6 weeks ago, there was a story, and it was one that I wanted to cover, but I just didn't, and I'm glad I'm able to talk about it now, where Omarosa Manigault accosted April Ryan at the White House and basically told her that she needs to tread lightly and that the White House has a dossier on her, that if she keeps trying to besmirch Donald Trump, if she keeps trying to do her job effectively, that Omarosa and the White House coalition of white power is going to bear down on April Ryan just for doing her job and asking relevant questions that you and I want to know. You know, on this show, what I do is try to connect the dots. I don't have press credentials to go to the White House, and even if I did, you wouldn't catch me dead in the damn White House. If you caught me in the White House, I probably would be dead because I don't fuck with them like that. Excuse my language. Now, all I'm saying is Omarosa represents sort of a disqualifier to the previous definition of racism that I presented earlier, which describes racism as prejudice and discrimination or antagonism directed against someone of a different race. You don't have to be white to be a white supremacist. You don't have to be white to ascribe to white male dominance narratives. And we discussed this just a moment ago with the privilege of intersectionality and when it comes to white power. And your ability to be indifferent to the plight of people within your own segment, within your own cohort, if it means that you can advance or you can gain some other material benefit. Omarosa found herself in a sweet position where she could gain access to the White House and get some other benefit from presenting this case that is different, that is aberrant to what most black women would ascribe to. There is no doubt that 95% of black women voted against Donald Trump. They voted specifically for Hillary Clinton. The fact that Omarosa Manigault works in the Trump administration is proof that she is averse to her coalition as a black woman. There is no, oh, well, I had a different mindset. And I will get to that momentarily, but I just want to end it here. Respect black women. Okay? Because they are a double minority at least. And if you talk about LGBT black women, triple minority. If you talk about disabled black women, triple minority. Disabled LGBT black women, immigrants. Disabled Muslim. Black women who are Muslim. That's a triple minority. So respect them. But even beyond that, respect women. Why are you taking someone who is the position of a journalist? You would never, Sean Spicer, sit and talk about somebody's hairpiece. I ain't never seen you talk about Donald Trump's fucking hair. Sorry, my language. I would never see you talk about Donald Trump's hair. So why are you talking about Maxine Waters' hair? Let's just think about that. What makes you, besides the fact that he pulls your strings, why is it that you find you're so comfortable to bring up Maxine Waters' hair, but you're not, or that these discussions about Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly is comfortable to bring up Maxine Waters' hair, but is not comfortable to bring up Donald Trump's hair. Let's talk about that, because that's sexism in and of itself. So with that, we will segue into a new category on this show, which is Ask James. So I have a few questions here. One is from a friend, and she'll know who she is. It says, Many people don't understand why saying not all white people is problematic. Many white people don't know what structural racism or sexism is. And so let me just take that part on its own. Not all white people. The issue with the phrase not all white people, and this comes up typically if I were to mention something as a generality, that most white people voted for Donald Trump, or even to separate it, that most white women and most white men voted for Donald Trump, which is the statistical fact, it becomes this sort of thorn in the paw of white people who didn't vote for Donald Trump and who are working to kind of mend the gap. And what I want white people to understand is that it's not a jab, it's not a dig at you to say that white people voted for Donald Trump. It is a fact. It is a statistical fact that most white people did. And so saying not all white people within the discourse of the coalition building is problematic, because what you're trying to do is take advantage of a privilege of having the access of being white and the privileges therein, and then also not take responsibility for the fact that most people within your demographic did coalesce to a certain narrative, did succumb to this narrative, did play into this same stereotypical role, which I believe, when it comes to coalition building, white people must take on a responsibility of working against it on that side. As a black man, I can go talk to black men about anything. Those are my brothers, those are my cousins, those are my friends, those are my, and so I have a particular in, and those people have my ear. Whereas with white people, I don't have the ear of the uncle who's sitting next to you at Thanksgiving who voted for Donald Trump. And so, I can confidently say that I didn't have Thanksgiving dinner with anybody who voted for Donald Trump. If you can't say that, then you must take responsibility for the fact that you are in a position, you have the privilege of access and the opportunity and the benefit of the doubt within within a realm of discussion that allows for that conversation. So there is a responsibility on your end in that. And so saying not all white people is sort of an absolution. It's an attempt to step outside of it, but then also remain at the table and feel as though you can contribute within the dialogue and the discourse with people of color as an equal, but you're not acknowledging that you have a separate privilege that you're not willing to utilize for the greater good. And so that's why not all white people is problematic. Next question. Hey man, love the show. My question is, as a former Bernie supporter, early on I was turned off by his refusal to campaign harder for the black vote and felt that he felt as if the nomination should have been his. What real impact did Bernie Sanders and the Bernie Bros have on both the Democratic platform and the Democratic Party going forward? And is it a net positive for black folk given how little campaigning he did for your vote? Keep up the great work and let me know if you need anything. Love. Thank you. My problem with the Bernie Sanders situation is that Bernie Sanders' campaign, his candidacy, seemed to revolve around a coalescence to white male dominance narratives. It wasn't so much that Bernie Sanders is a white supremacist. I don't believe Bernie Sanders hates black people. I don't believe he thinks black people are inferior. But when it came to, he had a lot of blind spots in his presentation. And many of those blind spots led black people to be mistrustful of someone who, already is from Vermont, that doesn't really represent, a black coalition, hasn't really earned a particular stake within the community. And I felt like Bernie Sanders and it wasn't really so much him, it was his candidacy and the way everything came about. He sort of relied on these photos of him marching with MLK. He relied on this sort of John Henry was a steel driving man legendary status of being a civil rights legend. And I felt that was an undeserved title. Because when it came down to John Lewis being an actual civil rights hero, there was opposition there. And there was no deference to that level of seniority that John Lewis has over Bernie Sanders within that regard. I don't expect any, white person to be so far ahead in that movement that they are now surpassing the contributions of anyone like a John Lewis. But when it comes to the fact that you have Reddit threads now where Bernie bros are attacking the credibility of John Ossoff, who is at Ossoff, follow John Ossoff. He is working to flip the 6th, which is the 6th Congressional District of Georgia. Early voting started on Monday of this week, and actually you can vote up until the 18th of next month, April 18th, 2017, to give the 6th congressional seat within Georgia to a Democrat, which would be John Ossoff. John Ossoff formerly worked for John Lewis. And, John Lewis is my congressman within the 5th Congressional District of Georgia. And he's a hero here. He is a legend. And so the opposition that Bernie posed to John Lewis in his attempt to sort of skirt on this narrative that he was this civil rights hero and then paint John Lewis as this corporate, corrupt person, establishment, all these other things. John Lewis is anything but establishment. This man that got his skull cracked so many times, Bloody Sunday, this man was there. The receipts are there. And so it's just kind of like, I think Bernie Sanders' movement was very problematic because it distorts reality. It now tells white people who don't know black history that this man, John Lewis, is somehow working against you because he endorsed someone like a Hillary Clinton. It further undermines the progressive coalition and movement because now, rather than having everyone, Bernie Sanders included, rallying behind this ability to turn the House, what we need to do, we need to get more seats, which is something that we failed to do on November 8th, 2016, it now is creating this distraction that you have people who are holding grudges against John Ossoff because he used to work for John Lewis in Atlanta. That makes no damn sense. And so Bernie Sanders' candidacy is problematic because it sort of, it is that not all white people attitude that allows you to say, I want to be helpful to black people, I want to be this, but I don't actually want to listen to you. I don't want to actually take into account your history. I don't actually want to take responsibility for white people on this side who go too far, who aren't paying attention, and reel them in. And so if we're trying to build a coalition, those two things do go hand in hand. And so that coupled with Bernie's problematic statements on just blacks, and he continually sort of conflated blackness with poverty and blackness with criminality, and I didn't like that. To the point where black people within his platform were only realized when it came to criminal justice reform, and so it became this notion that criminal justice reform was black justice reform, and I'm just kind of like, when you conflate and sort of merge the terms of criminal and black, you're playing right back into those same white male dominance narratives that paint black people like myself as inherently guilty. Even if your intent is to absolve us of such guilt, even if your language within that is ascribing an automatic guilt or a perception of guilt or a coalition of guilt within a system, it is also problematic. It also contributes to that same set of narratives. And so that's where I am with that. Dust is still hot, Jesus. Can POC be racist? This is another good question from a friend. And that's the last question. According to this adjusted definition of racism, that is a coalescence to white male dominance narratives, because white power is the structure of racial injustice in America. Within the context of America, people of color can absolutely be racist. They just can't be racist because racism, in my definition, in my view, requires coalescence to the existing power structure. Because racial discrimination requires power and prejudice, you have to be on the side that is promoting this idea against someone else. And the purity of whiteness means that the only people that can be discriminated against are people who aren't white, whether they're Hispanic, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Asian, whether they're black. And so while white people can be racist against any of these groups of people, so can any of these other groups of people be racist against any of those other groups of people. There is no existing power structure that works in the opposite direction. There's no existing power structure of racism in America that works against white people. And so do I believe people of color under this definition, under this suggested definition, can be racist and apply racial discrimination, which is, again, prejudice with power against white people? No, I don't believe that. Do I believe that black people or people of color can have microaggressions against white people? Absolutely. Let's take buses. You know, you can, as a white person, you can get on a bus in Atlanta, and more likely than not, you will be in the minority. There will be more black people on this bus than white people. But if the black bus driver rolls her eyes at you because you took too long to get on the bus or took too long to swipe your card, and she feels like you held her, you know, slowed down her bus time, or if as you're getting on the bus, a black girl rolls her eyes at you, that becomes a microaggression. It is not the same level of discrimination as, let's say, if there was a power structure in a place like, let's say, Birmingham, Alabama, where as a black person you had to get on the front of the bus, pay the same amount of money as white people, and then get off and get onto the back of the bus and sit in your designated section. And if at any point in time there were so many people on this bus that the designated white section that was a privilege in the front, first class on this bus that you all paid the same price for, became full, then you had to absorb the encumbrance that white people were now infringing on your designated section. That if that section became so full that it couldn't accommodate everyone, that you would then have to get off the bus as a policy. That is a white power structure that existed in America. It is supported by history. It is factual. And so that's the difference between sort of a microaggression and actual systemic racial discrimination, where the two aren't the same. And yes, you can have prejudices from any race against any other race, or within your own race, because these narratives that portray out through the media, through movies, tell all black people, tell all white people, tell all Americans that black people are inferior, that black people are dangerous. When you see crime movies and you know, black people only get cast as criminals, you know, it does tell the story, and it plants these subconscious seeds that contribute to inherent racial bias that tell the story of our lives. It plays out. Until next time, I'd like to ask you to relax, relate, and resist. Thank you.
Too complex.